On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on the United States at Pearl Harbor, prompting the U.S. to enter World War II the very next day. It was in response to this pivotal moment in history that Desmond Doss made the decision to enlist in the United States Army on April 1, 1942. Little did he realize that 3.5 years later, he would be standing on the White House lawn, receiving the nation's highest award for his bravery and courage under fire. Of the 6 million men in uniform during World War II, only 43 received the Congressional Medal of Honor. One of these was placed around the neck of a young Seventh-day Adventist, who during combat had not killed a single enemy soldier. In fact, he refused to carry a gun. His only weapons were his Bible and his faith in God. Doss was always praying or reading his Bible. From the first day of training, everyone could tell he was different. A devout Seventh-day Adventist, the first night Doss knelt beside his bunk in the barracks, oblivious to the taunts around him and the boots they threw his way, to spend his time talking to God. Regularly, he pulled the small Bible his new wife had given him for a wedding gift, and read it as well. Among the men of the unit, disdain turned to resentment. Doss refused to train or work on Saturday, the Lord's Sabbath. Though he felt no reservation about caring for the medical needs of the men or otherwise helping them on the Sabbath, he refused to violate it. The fact that he worked overtime to make up for it the rest of the week made little difference. Doss was teased, harassed, and ridiculed, and it only got worse. When it came time for the men of Doss's training company to begin qualifications on weaponry, Doss refused. He had entered the service as a medic, to heal the wounded, not to kill. As a small boy, he had seen a poster showing Cain standing over the body of his dead brother. From that moment on, Doss determined that he would never, under any circumstances, take another life. So what do you do with a soldier who won't train on Saturday, eat meat, or carry a gun or bayonet? Doss's commanding officer knew what to do. Paperwork was initiated to declare him unstable, a misfit, and wash him out of military service with a Section 8 discharge as unsuitable for military service. But Doss wanted to serve his country. He just refused to kill. He performed all of his other duties with dedication, was an exemplary soldier in every other way. At his hearing, he told the board, "I'd be a very poor Christian if I accepted a discharge implying that I was mentally off because of my religion. I'm sorry, gentlemen, but I can't accept that kind of a discharge." So the Army was stuck with Desmond Doss. Doss returned to his fellow soldiers, and they weren't any happier to still be stuck with him either. One promised Doss, and not in jest, that when the soldiers faced the inevitable combat with the enemy, "I'll kill you myself." Doss didn't doubt him. That first taste of combat came at Guam, where Doss began to prove his courage in going to any length to treat and care for his fellow soldiers. Then came Leyte. Time after time at Leyte, Doss braved enemy fire to go to the wounded and to remove them to safety. Once he darted into the open to treat and rescue a wounded man even while the area was alive with sniper fire. From a distance, his fellow soldiers watched in horror as a Japanese sniper leveled his rifle at the fearless medic. Because of the sniper's position, they could not return fire for fear of injuring some of their own. Doss treated the wounded man, evacuated him to the rear, and returned to his position. One of the sergeants told him, "Doss, we expected to see you killed any second. We couldn't shoot the sniper without killing our own men, and he had his machine gun aimed right at you. Didn't you see him?" Years later, a missionary in Japan related the story of Doss's brush with death that day. After the service, a Japanese man in the back of the room told one of the deacons, "That could very well have been me. I was there, and I remember having a soldier in my gun sight, but I couldn't pull the trigger." Doss not only survived Leyte, for his repeated heroism, he was awarded the Bronze Star Medal. As Corporal Doss stood before the men of Company B at the base of the Maida escarpment on Okinawa, they were beginning to believe in the prayers of the medic, whose only weapon was his Bible. "Time to go, men," Lieutenant Goronto told his troops. Doss had prayed, finished with his amen, and the rest would be in the hands of God. The soldiers struggled up the incline, reaching the sheer face that comprised the last 50 feet. Naval cargo nets were used to scale their surface. Upon reaching the summit, Company B was immediately pinned down by the heavy enemy fire. To the left, Company A was fighting to scale its sector as well. The first 5 men were killed and casualties mounted to the point that Company A could proceed no further. Headquarters radioed Company B for a report of their own casualties. So far, there had been none. The order was given that Company B would have to take the escarpment themselves. Sweeping across the escarpment, the men of Doss's company engaged the enemy in a fierce struggle, knocking out 8 or 9 pillboxes. By day's end, they emerged victoriously. Not a single man was killed, and the only wounds were sustained by 1 soldier in Company B whose hand was damaged by a falling rock. It was incredible, even miraculous. On May 5th, 1945, the tide of battle turned against the Americans. Enemy artillery, mortars, and machine gun fire began to rake into the ranks of Company B, 77th Infantry Division. Japanese soldiers swarmed out of their foxholes and caves in every direction. Almost immediately, 75 men fell wounded, and the remaining men were forced to fall back and retreat to the base of the escarpment. The only soldiers remaining at the top of the cliff were the wounded, the Japanese, and Desmond Doss. Heedless of the shells that burst around him and the bullets directed his way, Doss tended his injured comrades. At the base of the escarpment, those few soldiers who had managed to escape the onslaught could only sit helplessly by and hear the sounds of the battle as the wounded struggled to survive atop the cliff. And then, amazingly, a wounded soldier appeared over the face of the escarpment. Dangling from a rope, he slowly descended to the safety of its base as a tall medic fed the rope through his hands from the summit. First one, then another, and another, and another. Heedless of the advancing Japanese, Desmond Doss went about the work of sending the wounded to safety. Reports of that day tell of Japanese advancing with rifles and bayonets to within a few feet of the medic, slowly lowering his men to safety, before one of the wounded could kill the enemy before they shot Doss. For 5 hours, Doss lowered soldier after soldier down the face of the escarpment, using little more than a tree stump to wind the top edge of the rope around. Throughout the 5 hours, Doss had only one thought. He prayed, "Lord, help me get one more, just one more." How many men Doss saved that day, only God knows. 155 soldiers went up the escarpment that day, and only 55 were able to retreat without assistance. The Army determined the conscious objector, who had almost been court-martialed or discharged as unfit for military service, had saved 100 lives. "Couldn't be," Doss had replied. "It couldn't have been more than 50. I wouldn't have had the time to save 100 men." In deference to Doss's humble estimate, when the citation for his Medal of Honor was written, they split the difference, crediting the intrepid soldier with saving 75 fellow soldiers. That night, General A.D. Bruce arrived from the 77th Division headquarters. He was amazed when he heard the story of Desmond Doss and immediately began to prepare paperwork to award him the Medal of Honor. General Bruce missed the opportunity that evening to meet the heroic soldier, however. His incredible mission accomplished, a physically exhausted Desmond Doss had cleaned up as much as his simple surroundings would allow. Then he went off alone with his Bible to read, to pray, and to thank God for all he had accomplished on that day.